Hello everyone, tonight we wake up on a morning with no electricity. The sky is still pale, somewhere between the blue of late night and the grey of dawn. A cold breeze blows through the wooden cracks of the shelter where we are. In the background, a rooster crows. A steady drip runs from the thatched roof, and before you can even get up completely, an urgent sensation takes hold of your body. The need to go to the bathroom. The rough blankets are pushed aside. The ground is damp and uneven under bare feet. Outside, the clay is still dark, shaped by the previous day's footprints. The air smells of old smoke, wet earth, and a faint odor you can't yet identify. As he walks, guided by instinct and necessity, he notices that there are no doors, no plumbing, no sign of privacy. In that moment, you realize using a bathroom, right here, right now, will be the most challenging decision of your day, maybe even your life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And if you'd like, share in the comments where you're listening to me from right now, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to create that soft background hum, or put a blanket over your shoulders. Let's make this nighttime crossing together, hand in hand with the past, because today, we are going to a place where time has not been kind to hygiene, or to the sense of smell. But curiously, it has been honest with humanity. And who knows, in the end, you may never see your bathroom the same way again. Now then, take a deep breath. The air this morning is cold, slightly humid, and the story we are going to tell begins with a simple bodily desire, the most human of all. There is no door, just a dark gap between boards that creak when touched. The smell, previously undefined, now imposes itself, dense, acidic, alive. A smell that seems to have a soul. The structure where you are is a kind of improvised hut, supported by branches tied with leather straps and reinforced with dried clay. It is called a fossa. Sometimes a hole in the ground was enough. Other times, there were benches with opening, like a row of seats without dividers, side by side. You are not alone. Beside you, a lady murmurs a prayer as she relieves herself. On the other side, a young man holds his breath. The sounds are shared. Shame has no place here. Privacy was a luxury no one even dreamed of. And as uncomfortable as it may seem, for those who grew up here, it was just normal. A common, almost communal ritual. In villages, toilets were shared. Inside houses, they often used ceramic pots, which were later emptied out of windows or into side streets. In castles, there were structures called guard-robes, stone niches built into the walls, with openings that led directly to the moat. A small wooden seat, cold to the touch. Looking down, the dark void seems endless. Down below, the world ferments in silence. The sound of running water that sometimes escapes between the stones of the walls is not that of a stream. It is the ancestral lichet, mixed with urine, time, and lack of choice. During the rains, everything overflowed. The streets were covered. People avoided going out, and if they went out, they lifted their clothes up to their knees, in an almost comical dance with the unhealthiness. Even among nobles, odors were always present. They were strong perfumes, but did not bathe often. It was believed that hot water opened the pores and left the body vulnerable to disease. So, masking the smell was more common than eliminating floral aroma, musk, dried herbs hanging in the corridors, or to disguise what the castle did not hide. At night, there were ceramic chambers or wooden containers. In the morning, they were emptied by servants, sometimes forgotten, and when forgotten, the awakening was bittersweet. The heat of the old urine mixed with the cold of the early morning created a fog inside the rooms that no thick carpet could stop. Drinking water was a hotly contested commodity. In many cases, toilets were dangerously close to the water sources. Contamination was inevitable. Diseases were common, and although humanity was already aware of the risk, or at least felt its effects, the infrastructure did not keep up with the desire to improve. Walking down an alley often meant stepping in excrement. The shoes, made of thin leather, did not provide complete protection, and the sense of smell, over time, adapted. But the body did not. The body gets sick. The body complains, and in the Middle Ages, it did this with fevers, pains, absences. Silently. There is no door, just a dark gap between boards that creak when touched. The smell, previously undefined, now imposes itself. Thence, acidic, alive. A smell that seems to have a soul. The structure where you are is a kind of improvised hut, supported by branches tied with leather straps and reinforced with dry clay. It is called a fossa. Sometimes a hole in the ground was enough. Other times there were benches with opening, like a row of seats without dividers, side by side. And there, exposed to the cold and the presence of others, the most intimate moment became collective. Was there shame? For some, perhaps, but for many, it was routine. What for us seems like a nightmare for them was just the beginning of the morning. You are not alone. Beside you, a lady murmurs a prayer as she relieves herself. On the other side, a young man holds his breath. The sounds are shared. Shame. There is no room here. Privacy was a luxury that no one even dreamed of. And as uncomfortable as it may seem, for those who grew up here, it was just normal. A common, almost communal ritual. Children play a few meters away. Adults talk, even about smells. The matter of life or the body was not something to hide. And yet, something in you hesitates. The floor is slippery. The cold cuts, and your instinct tells you to get out of there as soon as possible. But you are not done yet. In villages, toilets were communal. Inside houses, they often used ceramic pots, which were later emptied out of windows or inside streets. In castles, there were structures called guard-robes, stone niches built into the walls, with openings that led directly to the moat. A small wooden seat, cold to the touch. Looking down, the dark void seems endless. Down below, the world ferments in silence. The winds that rise through these openings do not bring relief, but a warm, heavy breath. And yet, this was seen as progress, a rudimentary engineering, but functional. After all, keeping waste away from the internal corridors was, in a way, a luxury. The sound of running water that sometimes escapes between the stones of the walls is not that of a stream. It is the ancestral lichet, mixed with urine, time, and lack of choice. During the rains, everything overflowed. The streets were covered. People avoided going out, and if they went out, they lifted their clothes up to their knees, in an almost comical dance with the unhealthiness. Many cities had canals to try to carry waste outside the walls, but their effectiveness was questionable. Mud, sewage, water, mixed together, and the smell. It never completely went away. It was in the tissues, in the hair, in dreams, and yet life went on. Between one sip of beer and another, between laughter and fairs, the sewage insinuated itself like an invisible character in medieval routine. Even among nobles, odors were always present. They were strong perfumes, but did not bathe often. It was believed that hot water opened the pores and left the body vulnerable to disease. So, masking the smell was more common than eliminating floral aromas, musk, dried herbs hanging in the corridor, all to disguise what the castle did not hide. Clothes were changed more frequently than baths. The beds had curtains, but not to keep out the cold, but rather to keep out insects, which multiplied in damp and dirty environments. And even with all this, the nobility felt superior, because their bathrooms, although precarious, were exclusive, a rare luxury, a little less unbearable than the rest of the world. At night, there were ceramic chambers or wooden containers. In the morning, they were emptied by servants, sometimes forgotten, and when forgotten, waking up was bittersweet. The heat of old urine mixed with the cold of dawn created a mist inside the rooms that no thick carpet could stop. Some put herbs in the pots to alleviate the odors. Others covered them with wooden lids or thick cloth, but the smell always escaped, and dreams often became hazy visions of cesspools, alleys, and rotten winds. Sleeping with a container like this next to the bed was common, and also a constant reminder of the fragility of bodies, and of the resistance of smell, which, over time, I learned to accept. Drinking water was disputed. In many cases, the toilets were dangerously close to the fountains. Contamination was inevitable. Diseases common, and even though humanity was already aware of the risk, or at least felt its effects, the infrastructure did not keep up with the desire to improve. In times of plague, the blame fell on the air, the miasma. Nobody thought about germs. People thought about smells. And if the smell was strong, it was believed that the disease was there too. Ironic, because it was exactly the opposite. But we would only discover that much later. For now, we continue through damp alleys, holes in the ground, and shared silences. Medieval life flowed towards the ditches. Literally, there was a moment after using the pit that, for us, would be even more uncomfortable. The lack of toilet paper was not seen as a problem, because it simply did not exist. The body needed to be cleansed somehow, so resources were created, improvised, and accepted naturally. Dry straw was common in rural areas, rough, yes, but affordable. Large leaves, rags of old cloth, pieces of wool, or even dried mast. Everything was used. In coastal areas, even shells. In winter, if necessary, even snow. Texture mattered less than practicality, and hygiene, as we know it, was not a priority. It was more about removing the excess and moving on with the day. The poorest used what the countryside offered. A handful of hay collected right there, near the entrance to the pit. Sometimes thin branches which scratched the skin. But discomfort was nothing new. It was the body adapting to the environment. The peasants, with their calloused hands and eyes accustomed to the dust, did not complain. The cold burned more than the friction of the leaves, and the wind took away the little freshness that was left. Old rags, used and reused pieces of cloth, were shared in some families, rinsed at the end of the day, hung in the sun, hardened by waiting. And yet, there was a certain ritual, a silent normality. In more urban environments, such as monasteries and convents, the search for some form of cleanliness was carried out with greater care. Some monks used special cloths or even wooden implements, washed after use. But even so, the concept of asepsis was non-existent. It was more of a custom, an attempt to maintain a certain decorum. Odors were everywhere, but the mind sought purity in other ways, in silence, in the repetition of prayers, in fasting. The dirtiness of the body was tolerated as long as the soul was clean, and in this paradox, rudimentary methods of hygiene were acceptable, not out of ignorance, but out of resignation. There are curious records of toilets located on elevated bridges, with openings that led waste directly into the rivers. In theory, an ingenious solution. In practice, a constant health risk. Still, by the standards of the time, it was innovative. The markets also had their own septic tanks, often next to the food stalls. The smell did not drive away customers. They were used to it. And there was a tacit understanding. This was a common space, without demands. The noise of negotiations mixed with the sound of buckets being emptied. An almost symbolic scenario of the coexistence between the pleasure of shopping and the inconvenience of human needs. In some regions, urine was used in an unusual way, as a cleaning agent. Rich in ammonia, it was used to bleach fabric, disinfect tools, and even aid in the production of leather. It was common for craftsmen to keep barrels full of the liquid, collected from neighboring houses. In exchange, they would give small feathers or coins. The smell was intense, but the effect was practical. In ancient Rome, there were even taxes on the trade of urine, a curiosity that has lasted for centuries. And although it may seem grotesque, it demonstrates the ingenuity of ancient peoples in transforming what they had into useful things, even things that most people would rather forget. Some travelers of the time report even more exotic practices. In Iceland, there were communities that used animal skins, which were then cleaned with snow and left to dry in the wind. In parts of Asia, certain peoples used plant stems dipped in running water. Each culture found solutions within what nature offered. The body, however vulnerable, was also adaptable, and human creativity flourished even in the most intimate moment. In these everyday gestures, there was a kind of simple wisdom, a knowledge of the body, of the earth, of possibilities, a forgotten knowledge. But that was once all that existed. Today, all you have to do is stretch out your arm to grab a soft, fragrant white roll, press a button and hear the sound of the flush. But back then, every trip to the bathroom was a full sensory experience, rough, wet, cold. It was the body meeting the world, without filters. Hygiene was a concept under construction. Dignity, a daily negotiation with reality. And yet, life went on. People loved, laughed, wrote poems. With straw in their pockets and rags in their hands, they dreamed of what was to come. Perhaps a future with paper, with privacy, with scented soap. And with stories like this, told in half-light, many centuries later, the risks weren't just in the discomfort, they were in the invisible. With each visit to the pits, something imperceptible could be carried on shoes, clothes, in the air that was breathed. The diseases had no defined name, but they had a smell. They had a fever. They had consequences. Dysentery, intestinal fevers, cholera, words that today inhabit books, but at that time lived in bodies. The children were the most fragile. The elderly are the most exposed, and even the strong fell before a careless act, a sip of impure water, a poorly washed wound, or just time, because time, in environments like this, was also contaminated. Doctors weren't sure what was causing so much pain. They talked about unbalanced fluids, divine punishment, and poor nutrition, but no one suspected the bathroom. They were necessary, they were inevitable, and at the same time, they were traps. Septic tanks, however common, accumulated gases. On hot days, they gave off dangerous fumes. Prolonged presence there could cause fainting. There are records of sudden deaths. People who came in and never left, and when they left, they were weighed down, pale, sweaty. The body saying what science didn't yet know, that rot is not limited to smell. Animals also found shelter there. Rats, especially. They were the kings of the underground. They fed on what humans left behind, and they brought with them fleas, diseases, and a fearless look. At night, it was common to hear them, tearing rags, scratching walls, dragging bones. In some regions, snakes hid in wooden structures. Small accidents became tragedies. A sting, a scare, and fear began to live in the simplest gesture. Going to the bathroom, even spiders found comfort in the cracks. And the winged insects, they didn't respect social class. They flew from the poor to the noble without distinction. The structures could give way, made of damp wood, poorly supported, aged by constant use. There are reports of people who fell. They sank into pits. Some were rescued, others were not. The trauma was not just physical, it was existential. The body immersed in the forgotten matter of the city. The soul trying to stay afloat. The smell impregnated the skin for days, and the memory for a lifetime. The shame silent. The laughter of others inevitable. In a time without psychological understanding, the scars were internal and carried in silence. Like so much pain of that era, there are even legends of illustrious deaths. One of the most recounted is that of King Edmund Ironside, supposedly murdered while using the toilet. They say a blade hidden in the pit pierced his entrails. True or exaggerated, the story echoes with absurdity, and it shows how vulnerable even the powerful were. The royal throne might have been made of stone, but beneath it was clay. It was darkness. It was the same fate as the peasants. The bathroom, in a way, made everyone equal, and perhaps that's why he was so feared. Because there were no titles, there was no distinction, just the body, and your emergencies. Children learned early on to avoid certain times. At night, you didn't go to the bathroom alone, not even with light bulb. The risks were many. Slips, encounters with animals, falls. Some slept with pods next to their beds to prevent the crossing. Others held on until the next day. And dreams, sometimes, were filled with dark rivers, bottomless wells, corridors that smelled of fear. Parents did not scare their children, but they didn't hide the reality either. We had to be careful and hope that the body would cooperate, because in the Middle Ages, even the simplest act could be dangerous. Even so, life went on. People adapted. They learned the driest paths. They figured out the safest times. They created small solutions as much as possible. And they lived with the constant presence of dirt as if it were a character in a house. As if it had a name. And maybe it did. A name that was not said out loud, but everyone recognized it. The smell, the sound, the fear, the pit, part of everyday life, part of being. And at the end of the day, all that was left was the hope of waking up clean, alive, whole, to try once again not to slip. It was easy to imagine that everyone was bothered by dirt, but the concept of cleanliness in the 13th century was very different from what we know today. The discomfort we feel today when thinking about these practices did not exist in the same way. The sense of smell got used to it, the eyes adapted, and the mind constructed justifications. For many, the strong smell was a protection. Unpleasant aromas were believed to keep evil away, as if diseases were afraid of human odors. And so, the dirt became a shield, an invisible defense, a silent agreement with the world around. Doctors at the time spoke of the balance of humors. The body was seen as a container of fluids that needed to be in harmony. Dirt was not the enemy. It was a symptom. It was a reflection of something deeper. And cleaning too much could, they believed, open the door to imbalances. The water was viewed with caution, especially hot, because it would open the pores, leaving the body vulnerable and weakened. Thus, baths were rare, and the concept of hygiene moved away from the skin. It was getting closer to the inner order of behavior, of temperament, the way we ate, slept, prayed. There was also a spiritual aspect. The body was transitory, imperfect by nature. The focus was often on the soul, and if the soul was clean, the rest mattered less. The dirt of everyday life was accepted with humility. It was seen as part of the human condition. Some religious people dressed in clothes that they never washed, as a sign of renunciation, as proof of faith. Proximity to the suffering of the body was considered a path to spiritual elevation. The pain, the cold, the smell, all of this was part of a greater journey, of a journey that transcended matter. In the cities, dirt was part of the landscape. In the houses, it was part of the routine. The streets had open ditches where people dumped what was no longer useful. Children played near these ditches, dogs roamed around, and the adults, too busy with survival, accepted that scenario as inevitable. There were no clean-up campaigns, no regular collection. Everyone did what they could, and what they couldn't, they forgot. The olfactory memory of that time was not like ours. It was denser, more tolerant, and even though bodies got sick, they also learned to resist, with a kind of strength that today would seem impossible. The intimacy of the bathroom was also different. The act of evacuating was not burdened with shame. There was not so much taboo. It was a common event, sometimes even social. People talked in the pits. They shared stories. They made jokes. In certain cases, they used the moment to pray, reflect, or just watch the sky through the cracks in the ceiling. The embarrassment, when it existed, was mild, without the same moral burden that we develop over time. The body was accepted in its need, and the exposure, however uncomfortable it may seem, was just part of the human experience. Superstitions also surrounded the moment. It was believed that spirits could hide in bathrooms, that diseases were brought by foul-smelling winds. Some avoided using septic tanks during certain phases of the moon. Others recited prayers before entering. It was a borderline moment between the inner and outer world, between heaven and earth, between control and surrender. Evacuating, for some, was almost an act of humility, a reminder that we are made of flesh, bones, and fragility, and that no matter how high we climb the social hierarchy, we all end up, at some point, facing the same dark hole. As the centuries passed, this view began to change. Slowly, long before science discovered microorganisms, something was already changing in the collective gaze. Cities grew, epidemics were recurring, and there was a feeling that maybe dirt had something to do with it all. The first sanitation projects were timid, but revealing. The idea of hygiene was beginning to form, still far from ours, but closer to prevention. Yet for a long time, bathrooms remained shady places, of shame, of mystery, and paradoxically, of relief. When the sun disappeared behind the pointed roofs, the medieval city was plunged into another reality. There were no streetlights, lamps, or any artificial light. The candles inside the houses cast timid lights, dancing on the walls like living shadows. But outside, everything was darkness. A dense, almost physical darkness. The alleys disappeared into darkness. The lanes fell silent, and the world seemed smaller, quieter, more dangerous. Walking at night was an act of courage, or of desperation, because there, where the eyes could see little, instinct took over. It was common for people to avoid leaving their homes after sunset. Doors were locked with wooden bolts, sometimes with stones piled on top or bars crossed on the inside. Windows, if they existed, were covered with cloth or boards, and those who had to answer the call of their bodies often preferred to wait. Holding out until dawn was less risky than venturing out into the dark, because it wasn't just the cold that waited outside. There were wild dogs. There were thieves. There were drunks wandering the shadows. And there was fear. Always fear. Whispering among the rooftops. Some kept pots or buckets beside their beds. It was safer, even though the smell was strong. Even if the dreams were mixed with the presence of something unresolved in the room. In some houses, the exit to the pit was a small external corridor, but even that short journey could feel endless. The sounds of the night amplified everything. A snap of wood, a distant howl, a step that might have been yours, or might not have, and his heart, racing, wondered if it was worth it. Whether the physical relief was worth the invisible risk of the night. There were guards patrolling the streets, but their presence was sparse. They carried lamps, staffs, and sometimes bells to announce their passage. Most of them were sleeping, and whoever woke up to the sound of patrols felt a mixture of security and fear. Because if there was a guard there, it was because there could also be danger. The night was not neutral. It was alive. It breathed between the stones, in the cracks, on the roofs, and for many, this awareness was part of the sleep ritual. A light sleep, vigilant, who didn't give in completely, even when his eyes closed. Children were taught from an early age not to go out. They heard stories about creatures of darkness, soul thieves, shadows that took away those who disobeyed. These were legends, yes, but they were also strategies of protection. The night bathroom was the portal to these tales. The pit, a place between worlds. Even adults maintained a certain reverence, lighting a candle, walking to the gap, listening to the sound of their own footsteps. It was like entering a silent temple, where the body asked for the basics, but the spirit felt much more. The vulnerability was absolute. Even on quiet nights, there was something unsettling. The absence of light didn't just bring darkness, it brought time, it brought presence. You heard yourself more, the sound of your heart, the creaking of the floor, the murmur of your own breathing. And there, faced with the choice of leaving or waiting, many preferred the latter. They pulled the blanket tighter around their bodies. They drew their legs up. They tried to distract their minds with prayers, songs, or happy thoughts. And the will of the body became part of the night. A small, silent battle that each one fought as best they could. This routine formed habits. It formed bodies that knew how to wait, that knew the value of the morning light. When the first rays of light crossed the rooftops and painted the cobblestones with golden hues, the world became safe again. The city woke up, and with it, the septic tanks, the goings-on, the sounds and the smells. But at night, everything was different. It was the time of quiet fear, of the restrained body, of the alert mind. And remembering this now may make you appreciate the short walk to the bathroom even more. The light that turns on with a touch. The certainty that, outside, there is only silence, and no threat waiting for you. So the next time you go to the bathroom, with electric lights, a dry floor, running water, and soft paper, you might feel something different. Not just relief, but quiet gratitude for living in a time where privacy is possible, where the simple act of taking care of your body no longer requires courage, where the smell of morning carries no warnings, but freshness and silence. The journey to the Middle Ages, however uncomfortable it may have been, reminds us that the present is a privilege built slowly, between bits, rags, and repeated mistakes, between centuries of attempts, diseases, and discoveries. Today, the bathroom is a space for pause, of introspection, sometimes even as a refuge, a place where time slows down for a moment, where we are just body, where the mind empties, and the world waits. Something that, for medieval people, would be unimaginable. They lived the opposite. Hurry, exhibition, risk, and yet they continued. They found ways to laugh, to love each other, to survive. The memory of these practices connects us to a raw humanity, more real, and perhaps more connected with one's own limit. Because when everything is uncomfortable, any improvement becomes a blessing. The sounds of that time still echo if we listen carefully. The wood creaking under the weight of footsteps, the constant dripping after rain, the murmur of someone waiting their turn in the septic tank queue, the clatter of shells at the bottom of a bucket, the creaking of ropes pulling a bucket of murky water. And even among these noises, there was life. Sounds that lulled cold nights, that marked the rhythm of an existence where every gesture was essential. And now, here, on the brink of sleep, we can only imagine Because the past, however uncomfortable, welcomes us with its lessons. And if for a moment you felt like you were part of that time, even with your eyes closed, then this story has fulfilled its purpose. It was not made to shock, nor to teach rules. It was made to calm, to remind you that history is not only made of wars, empires and kings, but also of pits, of rags, of human beings trying to live in the best way they could. Education that approaches sleep needs to be like this. Soft, human, almost a whisper, like the memory of a dream that is already fading in the mind. The breeze may be colder now, or perhaps sweeter. Maybe the sound around you is no longer the same. Maybe you are listening to the wind, or the fan, or just the silence. And that is good, because silence also tells stories. Stories that can only be heard when the body relaxes, when the thought surrenders, when there is no more urgency, just presence. Here, in this moment, you and time, together, no rush, no past, no future, just this feeling of rest, and a story that slowly fades away. If this silent journey into the dark alleys of the Middle Ages has found you in a moment, may it have brought you a little lightness. And if it has made you laugh, frown, or simply reflect, then perhaps you are ready to sleep, with a little more awareness of the small comforts of the present, with a sense that, despite everything, we are surrounded by invisible achievement, and that the world, even in its strangest parts, is made of paths that have brought us here. Now, close your eyes if you want. The weather is calm. The night no longer demands answers. Maybe you can imagine a stream, with water running between smooth stones, or the breeze breaking through the leaves of an ancient tree. Maybe the sound of a fireplace, or the soft crackling of wood in a wood stove. I will be here, whispering stories whenever you need me. Because sometimes all we want is for someone to say, in a low voice, everything is okay. You can rest now.